He controlled all of South Chicago. His name alone made men tremble. He had 30 bodyguards, bulletproof windows, and a bomb shelter beneath his wine cellar. But for 23 days straight, Franco Castellano, the most feared mafia boss in the city, could not get his 4-year-old daughter to swallow a single spoonful of soup. Then a woman arrived. No title, no degree, no money, just yellow rubber gloves and a recipe passed down from a grandmother neither of them knew they shared. In 60 seconds, she did what $2 million couldn't. Welcome. This channel is where the powerful are humbled, where love outranks every empire, and where family means more than blood or money ever could. Power means nothing without the people you love. Franco learned that the hard way. If this story speaks to you, leave a like. Tell us your comfort food in the comments, share this video, and subscribe so we can keep bringing you stories that actually matter.
That was until the afternoon Franco arrived home earlier than expected. He had left a meeting with his capo regimes, unable to concentrate. He entered the kitchen, searching for whiskey in a dark corner to yell in private, but stopped abruptly at the entrance. An aroma filled the air, not his wife's Chanel perfume, which was gone forever. It was not the biting disinfectant the medical staff always used. This was mint, slow-cooked chicken broth, and star-shaped noodles, the scent of small kitchens in poor areas where love, not money, was the main ingredient. It was the smell of the soup Elena would secretly cook for Lily when she was sick. When Franco was out, when she wanted her child to know her mother's origins, Franco looked up, and his heart, the one that had ordered hits on his rivals, simply stopped beating. There, in the center of his lavish kitchen, a young woman in a baggy Navy maid's uniform knelt in front of his daughter. It was not the $5,000-a-day nurse or the nutritionist with a doctorate. It was just a cleaner hired that same morning, whose name he did not even know. Her bright yellow rubber gloves, the type for scrubbing toilets, held a cheap plastic spoon you could find at a dollar store, 10 for $1. And Lily, his Lily, had her mouth open. The plastic spoon entered her mouth, her little throat swallowed. Then the child's chapped lips, which had been silent for 23 long days, moved to form a single word: more. Franco Castellano, the feared mob boss of Chicago, a man who bowed to no one, suddenly found his knees hitting the floor right in his own kitchen doorway. Who was this woman in the yellow gloves? How did she succeed where a $2 million medical team had failed? And why did that simple soup, held in a worn plastic bowl, smell exactly like his wife who was now buried 6 feet deep? Franco's knees were pressed on the cold marble, but he did not feel a thing. The cold that should have cut through his expensive Italian suit was nothing next to the fire blazing in his chest. He attempted to get up, but his legs would not cooperate. 23 sleepless nights watching his daughter fade away, yelling at doctors and threatening specialists, had worn him down to nothing. He grabbed the doorframe, his knuckles pale, and slowly pulled himself upright. The aroma surrounded him like a phantom's touch: mint, chicken broth, and little pasta stars. Instantly, Franco was no longer in his $3 million kitchen. He was transported 3 years into the past. On a Sunday, entering the small service kitchen Elena had made her own. She was at the stove, an apron covering her designer gown, stirring an old, battered pot. That same smell filled the tiny room. It was the scent of herbs, patience, love, and hardship. Franco had scrunched up his nose. "Why are you making that cheap stuff? We have a professional chef." Elena had looked at him, her dark eyes gentle, a slight smile on her face. "Because Lily needs to learn the taste of love, Franco, not the taste of money." He had merely scoffed and left the room. Now, standing in that doorway as the same scent overwhelmed him, Franco would have traded his whole criminal empire to hear her say that again. The memory was broken when the woman in the yellow gloves started to hum a tune. It was a simple, old lullaby, the type passed from mother to child through generations that had little else to offer. Franco didn't recognize the song, but he felt it in his soul. And Lily, who had been like a vacant porcelain doll for 23 days, did the unbelievable. A corner of her mouth lifted. It was not a real smile, but it was life. A glimmer of light in the darkness she had created for herself. Franco held his breath. He desperately wanted to run to his daughter, hold her tight, and cry into her hair, pleading with her to come back. But his feet were glued to the spot because he was terrified. He feared that any movement or sound would destroy the delicate moment. The girl in the yellow gloves would fall silent, Lily would shut her mouth once more, and that tiny spark of life would be extinguished. So, Franco Castellano, the man who ordered hits without hesitation and built his world on violence and intimidation, stood frozen in his kitchen, afraid of the sound of his own breathing. A sharp voice shattered the moment. "What in the world do you think you are doing?" Nurse Patricia Coleman charged in from a side door, phone in hand, her face a mask of professional anger. She had witnessed the scene through the glass. The young woman in the yellow gloves whipped around, her eyes filled with panic. The plastic spoon fell from her grasp, bouncing off the marble floor. Soup splashed onto the clean white tiles. Then she saw Franco. All the color left her face. Her mouth opened, but she was speechless. In her eyes, Franco saw the pure terror of someone with nothing who was about to lose it all. But Franco was not looking at her. He was looking at Lily. His daughter was gazing at the fallen spoon, her small hand reaching for the spot where the woman had just been. Her lips formed a word she had not uttered in 23 days. More. And for the first time since Elena's casket was laid in the frozen Chicago ground, a single tear traced a path down Franco Castellano's cheek. To know why that one tear carried more weight than all the blood Franco had ever seen spilled, you have to go back 23 days to when his entire life turned to dust. The Chicago wind that day was like 1,000 icy knives. The sky was a heavy, low blanket of gray, as if nature itself was in mourning. Oak Hill Cemetery lay before the crowd, its gravestones jutting from the snow like broken teeth. Franco stood by the open grave in a black Armani suit, his expression like stone. He did not cry. He did not shake. The crime lord, who had buried his own father when he was just 12, understood that tears were something powerful men could not afford. Next to him, Lily held her mother's silk scarf, a pale blue one that held the faint trace of Chanel perfume. Her little fingers squeezed the fabric until her knuckles were white. She looked at the oak casket suspended above the ground, her dark eyes wide and empty. The priest spoke words Franco couldn't hear. As the coffin was lowered, Lily did not shed a tear. She just shut down, like a candle being blown out. 1 second, a 4-year-old girl was beside her father. The next, only a breathing shell remained, empty inside. Franco saw it happen, but he didn't grasp its meaning yet. For the first 3 days, he chalked it up to shock. Children handle grief in their own way, the psychologist told him. Give her space. On day 4, Lily rejected her breakfast. The nanny offered oatmeal, then pancakes, then her favorite yogurt with strawberries. Lily just turned her face to the wall. On day 7, she refused to drink water. Her lips began to crack. Her skin looked ghostly. Franco dismissed the nanny and hired 3 others. On day 10, Dr. Harrison Webb, who had cared for 3 generations of Castellanos, put an intravenous line in Lily's small arm. Nutrients flowed into her as she lay still in her princess bed, surrounded by toys that couldn't make her smile. Day 14, day 17, day 20. Franco just kept throwing money at the problem, issue like fuel on a flame. He brought in top child doctors from Johns Hopkins. He paid for dietitians, counselors, and even hypnotists. He purchased every possible toy, turned her bedroom into a fantasy land, and offered her horses, palaces, and whatever she could ever want. Lily showed no reaction. On day 22, Dr. Webb took Franco to the side. The elderly physician's face was pale from weariness and a deeper sense of failure. "Mr. Castellano, her body is just giving up. We are past the point of medicine. This is different. Franco seized the doctor by his coat, hoisting him into the air. I will give you $10 million to make my daughter well. Tell me what you want. I will give you anything. Dr. Webb gazed at him, his expression full of sadness. Some things cannot be bought with money, sir, and your daughter's desire to live is one. Later, Franco waited by Lily's door. The corridor was dim. The house was quiet, but for the steady pulse of the machine monitoring her heart. He rested his head on the cool doorframe and spoke into the shadows. Elena, are you trying to take her? Are you going to leave me completely alone? There was no reply, just the constant ping from the machine, ticking away the final moments of his daughter's existence. Franco Castellano was no average person, and the domain he controlled was far from it. His estate was perched on Gold Coast Hill, a jewel looking over its territory. It had 30 rooms on 4 levels, with massive windows that offered views of Lake Michigan's vast, gray expanse. The design was a stronghold hidden within opulence, with steel-enforced concrete under the marble and shatterproof glass panes everywhere. A fallout shelter was dug 3 levels below the wine storage. 20 guards walked the property on a constant cycle. Security cameras watched every part of the land, sending feeds to a non-stop command center. The entire boundary had motion detectors. Hidden alert buttons were under each table. This was the seat of power for South Chicago's criminal world. For 15 years, Franco had governed with absolute authority, both firm and subtle. He controlled gambling, illegal loans, and extortion schemes. Every dirty dollar moving through the south side of town went through his control. Competing crews had attempted to take him on. Now they were in nameless plots or resting deep in Lake Michigan. Yet kingdoms, just like people, can fall apart from the inside. After Elena died, Franco had walked away from his empire. He missed meetings. He ignored calls. The steady flow of his top men trying to see him stopped when they heard the boss was not available. Vincent Moretti, his most loyal man for over 20 years, appeared at the study entrance, his worn face showing his worry. Boss, the Irish are making a play on the north side. They seized 3 of our betting parlors. The Russians are sniffing around as well. They sense weakness. Franco remained in his large chair, eyes fixed on the monitor displaying Lily's room. His child was still, enclosed by equipment that whirred and beeped, forcing her to stay alive. Let them have it, Franco uttered, his voice empty. Vincent moved closer. Boss, if we do nothing, they will see us as weak. 15 years of effort. Years. I said, let them have it. His statement felt like a final judgment. In 15 years, Franco Castellano had never backed down. He had never revealed any vulnerability. He never ignored a slight. But an empire means nothing if there is no one to inherit it. Every evening, Franco lingered by Lily's door, incapable of going inside. He would place his hand on the door, sensing the slight hum of the machines and hearing the steady beep that proved she was still alive. He was terrified to enter, worried that opening the door would reveal she was gone, with alarms blaring as staff rushed around a body that had already given up. So he waited in the shadows and did what he had not done since he was 12 years old. Not since he saw his own father die on a cold warehouse floor. He prayed, God, if you can hear me, take it all. Take every last thing. Just let me keep my daughter. A response arrived on day 22, but it was not divine. The heart monitor blared. Its warning sound cut through the estate like a blade. Franco threw the door open, practically tearing it off, yelling for Dr. Webb, for the medical staff, for anybody. Lily's tiny frame shook one time, then a second, and then she was motionless. 30 seconds of frantic pumping on her chest. 30 seconds as Franco's entire life fell apart. 30 seconds of pleading with every god he had ever defied. And then a pulse. Dr. Webb cleaned the perspiration from his forehead. His hands were shaking. She is stable for the moment. He faced Franco, his gaze heavy with a reality he hesitated to share. You have about a week, Mr. Castellano. Perhaps not even that. She is slipping away. Franco dropped to the floor next to his daughter's bed. He held her small hand, so delicate, so frail, so icy, and brought it to his mouth. "I will do whatever is necessary," he murmured. "No matter what it is, no matter the price." He was unaware that the solution to his plea was. At that exact time, in a run-down apartment 45 minutes away from the Castellano estate, a young woman was on an old mattress, counting her money. It was a completely different universe. Aurora Hayes laid out the coins on the dirty linen. 3 quarters, 4 dimes, and 7 pennies, $1.22, which was all the money she had. The space she was in was barely 15 square meters. Fissures ran up the plaster like spider webs. A large damp spot marked the ceiling from the constant drip of the leaky roof. Roaches moved freely in the shadows, not even trying to conceal themselves. The heater had broken 2 years prior, and the building owner no longer promised to repair it. This was her life. On the small bed on the other side of the room, an old woman leaned on some thin pillows, her gaze lost in the haze of her condition. Martha Hayes was 82, but her consciousness was stuck in the distant past. She looked at Aurora, her smile puzzled. "Sarah, are you there, Sarah? Did you get my pills?" Aurora felt a pang of sadness. Sarah was her mother's name. Her mother had passed away 12 years ago. "It is me, Grandma. It is Aurora." Martha's expression wavered and then went blank again. "Sarah, you were always such a sweet child. Your dad should be back any minute." Aurora glanced at the money she held and then at the medicine vial on the table, which had been empty for a day. Her grandmother's prescription was $47 for 2 weeks. The most affordable food would cost $15 for 7 days. She had $1.22. Pills or groceries? It was never an option to have both. The decision tormented her constantly every single day. Yet it was not a real decision. It never had been. 6 months earlier, Aurora thought things were as bad as they could get. She was mistaken. The memory came back without warning. The chilly clinic floor, the humming lights above, the warmth spreading beneath her. The collectors her former husband owed money to had located her. They had delivered their message with brutal force, while her cries for assistance went unheard. When she awoke, the look on the doctor's face said it all. 5 months along, with a child she had secretly named, spoken to at night, and sworn to give a better future. Lost. Aurora did not shed a tear then. She had not shed one since. She had nothing left to cry. A rap at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Answering it, she saw a woman in a worn jacket holding a file. The agency's sticker was coming off the cover. "Aurora Hayes, I have a job opening. A live-in housekeeper. In one of those large houses on the north side. The salary is..." The woman glanced at her papers. "Excellent. In fact, it is 3 times the standard pay." Aurora's gaze sharpened. "So what is the problem?" The woman paused. "The man you would work for is... well, he is named Franco Castellano." That name dropped with heavy significance. Every person on the south side recognized it, understood its power, and knew the dark secrets it held. "The crime lord." "They call him a businessman," she corrected. The woman gave a slight shrug. "Listen, I have to inform you. What you decide to do with that is up to you." Aurora glanced over at her grandmother, who was softly singing to a baby that was not there. She saw the empty pill bottle, the pile of unpaid notices, and the eviction paper on the wall. "What time do I begin?" "Tomorrow at 6 a.m. Once the woman was gone, Aurora got down on the floor and retrieved a little box from under a loose plank. Inside was a picture, the corners smoothed from being held so often. 2 young girls were grinning in the sun, one with dark hair, one fair, who were cousins and inseparable friends. On the reverse, a child's scrawl read, "Aurora, I will always protect you. Elena." Elena Castellano, or Elena Reyes, as she was known back then, before she had married into a world of money and power that Aurora could never touch. Elena, who sent secret letters and hidden cash. Elena, who never forgot her roots. Elena, who was buried 23 days ago. Aurora clutched the photo to her chest, whispering into the quiet room. "I'm on my way, sister. I'm just so sorry I was too late." Aurora entered the Castellano property using the servants' gate, a skinny path concealed by a row of perfectly shaped bushes, hidden from the main driveway. The gate was meant to be overlooked, much like the people who used it. She stepped onto the grounds, and it took her breath away. The mansion stood before her like a palace from another time. 3 levels of white stone and shining windows reached for the gray Chicago sky. The front yard was bigger than her entire city block. Fountains made from Italian marble were quiet in the cold winter air, their water shut off until spring. Her own small apartment could have vanished inside this place 100 times. A woman in a neat black dress came out of a side door. Her silver hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She held a clipboard and had a look on her face that said Aurora was already a disappointment. "You must be the new girl from the agency." It was a statement, not a question. "I am Mrs. Irene Crawford, the head housekeeper. You will call me Mrs. Crawford, is that clear?" Aurora simply nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Crawford." The woman walked around her in a slow circle, examining her like a buyer at a livestock sale. She suddenly grabbed Aurora's hands, flipping them over to inspect her palms, her fingers, her nails. Fingernails must be short. "Do you have any infectious diseases or a criminal record?" "No, ma'am, I don't." Mrs. Crawford wrote something on her clipboard, her lips pressed together in a thin, disapproving line. What she was disapproving of, Aurora didn't know. Maybe it was just everything about her. "Follow me." The inside of the mansion was even more breathtaking. The floors were such polished marble that she could see herself looking back, a ghost in old shoes and donated clothes, completely lost in this temple of wealth. But under all the beauty, something felt wrong. The air was heavy and cold, filled with a silence so thick it hurt Aurora's ears. There were no voices echoing down the hallways, no sounds of footsteps, no sign of life. The mansion felt less like a house and more like a beautiful tomb, empty and dead on the inside. Mrs. Crawford took her to a tiny room near the service hallway. She gave her a navy blue uniform that was a little too big, along with a pair of bright yellow rubber gloves. "The rules," Mrs. Crawford said, her voice like the edge of sharp glass. "Do not look Mr. Castellano in the eye. Do not talk unless he talks to you first. If you see him coming, make yourself scarce. Hide in a closet, find a corner, go to another room. I don't care where. Simply disappear." Aurora nodded without a word. "And the most important rule." Mrs. Crawford leaned in, her eyes fixed on Aurora's. "You will not, under any circumstances, go near the east wing. The child's room is there. You will not approach it, you will not look at it. You will not even think about it. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Mrs. Crawford." The older woman watched her for a moment, looking for any hint of defiance. She found none and gave a sharp nod. "Your tasks for today: scrub the guest bathrooms. You will mop the service hallways. Then you will polish the windows in the kitchen. Start now." Aurora put on the uniform inside a storage closet that smelled like bleach and old memories. The uniform was loose on her skinny body, and the yellow gloves made squeaking sounds. She saw her reflection in a dirty mirror leaning against a wall. She looked like a nobody. Good. That's what she was used to. The hours went by in a haze of cleaning and polishing. Aurora did her work in total silence, unnoticed by the few staff members who walked past her without even a look. She was almost done mopping the east hallway when she heard it. Beeping. It was the steady, rhythmic sound of medical machines. The sound was coming from behind a closed door at the end of the hall, the forbidden east wing. Aurora's grip on the mop handle tightened. Then she heard voices, two nurses talking quietly just around the corner. She hasn't cried in 3 days. That's a bad sign, a very bad sign. I know. When kids stop crying, it means they've lost all hope. A pain shot through Aurora's chest. She remembered her own child, the baby who had never taken a breath, who had never opened its eyes, who had never let out its first cry. The one she had lost on a cold hospital floor as people stepped around her. Her baby had not cried either. Some goodbyes, she knew, are completely silent. The collision she was warned about happened only 3 hours into her first shift. She was down on her knees in the grand foyer, scrubbing the marble floor with an old, worn-out brush. The bucket of gray, soapy water was beside her, full of the grime she had already removed from the stone. Her back was sore and her knees hurt, but she continued working, unseen and unheard, exactly as she was told. The front door flew open with a bang. Franco Castellano stormed in like a human hurricane. His face looked like it was carved from stone. His jaw was so tight that a muscle twitched in his cheek. His eyes were red from a lack of sleep, circled by shadows so dark they looked like bruises. He had just left another appointment with Dr. Webb, more bad news. Another step closer to the end. Aurora noticed him a second too late. She hurried to pick up her things and vanish like Mrs. Crawford had ordered, but her hands were not fast enough. Her legs did not move quickly enough. Franco's $5,000 handcrafted Italian leather shoe hit the edge of her bucket. Water sloshed onto the perfectly clean marble. A few drops hit his shoes, leaving dark spots on the leather like fresh wounds. The silence that came after was deafening. Franco froze in place. He looked down at his damaged shoes. Then his eyes moved to Aurora, who was still on her knees, gripping her brush with white knuckles. He stared at her like someone would stare at an insect on their dinner plate. "Who let you in here?" His voice was quiet and controlled. That made it much more frightening than a shout. Aurora's mouth moved, but all that came out was a choked whisper. "I am so sorry, sir. I am new. I did not see." "Mrs. Crawford!" He didn't have to raise his voice. The head housekeeper appeared from a nearby hallway in seconds, her face white with fear. "Mr. Castellano, I am so sorry. She just began working this morning." Franco just raised a hand. Mrs. Crawford went quiet. "Teach her the rules," he said. Each word landed like a heavy stone and by her new shoes. "That cheap rubber squeaking on my floors grates on my nerves." He started to walk away, letting Aurora exhale just for a moment. But he stopped. "And Mrs. Crawford." Without turning around, he added, "Keep her from Lily. I refuse to let my daughter breathe the stench of the streets they bring inside." His words hit her like an open hand. Aurora remained frozen, staring at the puddle as Franco's steps vanished down the hall. A distant door slammed shut, followed by complete silence. Miss Crawford loomed above, her stiff form radiating disapproval. "Clean this mess. Then go to the servants' area for a new assignment." The housekeeper left. Aurora was alone with the filthy water and her own shame. Slowly, Aurora lifted her gaze. She looked down the corridor where Franco disappeared, her eyes welling with tears she fought to hold back. She had endured worse insults and harsher treatment before. Yet his thoughtless cruelty, how easily he erased her, was a different kind of pain, her very being, cutting far deeper than she anticipated. Still, a memory of Elena's voice echoed from an old letter. Aurora knew the words by heart from reading them countless times. "Franco's heart is good, it is just buried." Aurora forced back her tears and grabbed her cleaning brush. How far down was it buried? Was there anything left to find under all that coldness? 3 in the morning. Darkness covered the servant's wing, but sleep would not come for Aurora. Her mattress was a thin, hard slab. The room was freezing cold. It seemed the heat did not reach this neglected part of the house. She curled up under a mothball-scented blanket, looking at the ceiling. She had to get up, to get some air. Aurora slid from the bed and tiptoed into the hall. The mansion transformed after dark. Shadows gathered in every corner. Beams of moonlight cut across the tall windows. Each floorboard creak was like a ghostly murmur. Then a sound reached her. Not the steady beep of machines it was singing. A strained, cracking voice, unable to hold a single note. It was not a song, but pure, raw sound of desperation. Aurora traced the sound to the forbidden east wing. A door was open just a crack, leaking a faint light. She peeked inside. There was Franco Castellano, hunched over his daughter's bed. His wide shoulders sagged, his back stooped like a man defeated by sorrow. The feared mob boss who treated her like trash was now a hollowed-out shell. He was trying to sing a lullaby. The words were jumbled, the melody gone. He obviously did not know the song. Maybe he had never sung to his child before Elena's death. But he was trying. Lily was perfectly still, her tiny frame barely a bump under the covers. Her skin was pulled tight over her frail bones. Her small hand held a pale blue silk scarf with the letter E stitched on it. Elena's scarf. Franco's singing faded away. He leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead. "Please do not leave me, Lily." His soft voice reached her through the doorway. "Daddy cannot live if you are gone." He sounded like a little boy, terrified of being alone. Aurora backed away, her hand shooting to her lips, to stifle a sob. He was not a monster. He was a father losing his little girl. She ran back to her room, silent tears flowing freely. She knew this exact feeling. 6 months earlier, she had also sung lullabies. Not to a baby in a crib, but to the rounded belly that carried her future. Then she saw the blood, and heard the silence where a heart should have been beating. Franco Castellano was about to lose his child. Aurora had already lost hers. In that common sorrow, an unseen connection formed. Day 23, late afternoon. Aurora was cleaning the kitchen windows. This was the kitchen where her life would change. She was on a stepladder, the squeak of her rubber gloves marking time on the glass. Down below, a drama unfolded that she was meant to disregard. Nurse Patricia Coleman sat by Lily's high chair, a spoonful of gray paste ready. The little girl was still, like a doll with empty eyes fixed on some distant point. The machines beside her continued their rhythmic beeping. "Lily, it is time to eat." Patricia's tone was all business, no comfort, only just professional annoyance. "If you refuse to eat, the feeding tube goes back in. You recall the tube, right? It is painful." Lily gave no sign she had heard. She did not even blink. Patricia made another attempt, shoving the spoon at the girl's closed mouth. The gray paste smudged her lips, uneaten. The nurse cleaned it off like a machine. "All right, be that way." Patricia's phone vibrated. She looked at her screen, then the girl, then her screen again. She sighed, put the spoon down, and got up. "I will return shortly. Stay right there." Her attempt at a joke echoed in the quiet room. Patricia left through a side door, phone already to her ear. Aurora paused her work. She looked down and truly saw Lily for the first time. The girl was just a skeleton. Her skin was taut over sharp, awkward bones. Her dark hair was dull and limp. Her eyes, which shone in all the family photos, were now lifeless and empty. And then, Aurora saw something. One single tear slid down Lily's white cheek. It was silent, and no one wiped it away. The child made no sound, not a sob or a sniffle. Just one tear, cutting a path through the paste left on her skin. A tear that had no voice. Aurora felt a pain in her chest, and her eyes clouded over. 6 months ago, she was on a hospital floor, bleeding and alone. People just walked past her. Nobody paused to help. Nobody even noticed. She lost her baby in silence, with strangers all around who decided she was not worth helping. She glanced at the blinking red light of the security camera. She saw the door Patricia had used. She saw the little girl wasting away in her chair. Aurora came down the ladder. Her body acted before her brain could protest. She went to her bag in a service corner and took out a plastic box. It held her lunch: chicken soup with little star noodles and fresh mint. It was her grandmother's recipe. She and Elena had learned it together as kids, on their toes in a tiny kitchen filled with love, not wealth. Aurora was aware of the consequences of being discovered. Mrs. Crawford would dismiss her on the spot. She would have no money for her grandmother's medication, for anything. She looked back at Lily. The girl was still, the one tear still wet on her face, with no one to comfort her. Aurora had already seen one child die quietly, her own baby, whom she never held. She would not let it happen a second time. Never. She popped the lid on the container. The aroma of mint and chicken soup spread through the sterile kitchen like a warm embrace. Franco stayed on the floor, tears flowing down his cheeks. Chicago's most dangerous man was on his knees, crying without shame, his gaze locked on his daughter. Aurora was paralyzed next to the high chair, the spoon in her hand dripping soup on the clean floor. Her heart pounded. Her mind screamed at her to flee, to vanish, to do what she was paid to do, be unseen. But she could not move. The side door flew open. Nurse Patricia rushed in, phone in hand. She saw everything at once, Franco crying on the floor, Aurora over the girl, the soup, the spoon on the floor. Her face twisted in professional fury. "Mr. Castellano!" Patricia's sharp voice cut the silence. "This woman gave your daughter food that was not approved. I cannot know what is in it. It might be unsafe, even toxic." Franco stopped crying. His jaw clenched. He got to his feet slowly, his presence filling the room like an approaching thunderstorm. Aurora felt a chill run through her. This was the moment she feared. The anger of a powerful man aimed at a servant who had crossed a line. Franco advanced on her. His steps sounded like hammer blows. Aurora backed away until the refrigerator stopped her. She looked down, preparing for his attack, not knowing if it would be with words or his hands. But he was not looking at her. His eyes were fixed on Lily. His daughter was doing something new, something she had not done since her mother's funeral. Her little arm was extended, her fingers trying to reach for Aurora. "More," the tiny voice whispered. A tiny whisper came from Lily's chapped lips. "Please." The sound stopped Franco's world. He had forced himself to believe he would never hear that small, fragile voice again. His daughter had been silent for 23 agonizing days, trapped in a grief too big for a 4-year-old. But she had just spoken. Franco slowly turned his exhausted, haunted eyes to Aurora. He studied her face as if for the first time. "Where did you find this recipe?" Aurora's voice shook. "It was my grandmother's, sir." "Your grandmother," Franco repeated, his gaze growing intense. "Where was she from?" "West Side, sir. We were raised there." Those words hit him hard. West Side was where Elena grew up, the streets she knew before his wealth changed her life forever. Franco stared at Aurora, a desperate idea forming in his mind. He looked at Mrs. Crawford, who had appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of confusion. "This woman is staying," Franco declared, his tone final. "Her only job from now on is to take care of Lily." Patricia's jaw dropped. "Mr. Castellano, this is completely inappropriate. I have to object." "You're fired," Franco said without a glance. "Get your things and go." Mrs. Crawford stepped forward. "Sir, are you sure about this? She is just a cleaning girl." "I said she stays." The kitchen fell silent. Aurora stood frozen, trying to understand what just happened. Moments ago, she was an invisible servant scrubbing windows. Now, the most powerful man in Chicago was trusting her with his daughter's life. Then, Lily did something that stunned everyone. She smiled. It was small and weak, but it was a real smile, the first one in 23 days. In the following days, the Castellano mansion started to change, slowly, like ice thawing in the sun. Aurora's first act of defiance was opening the drapes. Heavy velvet curtains had darkened Lily's room since the funeral, trapping sorrow inside. Aurora threw them open, letting golden sunlight pour in for the first time in almost a month. Mrs. Crawford nearly fainted when she found wildflowers in a glass on Lily's bedside table. Simple daisies and dandelions from the garden's edge sat beside the machines that monitored Lily's vitals. "Those weeds will bring in bugs," the housekeeper complained. Aurora just smiled politely and left them there. Every day she cooked the same simple soup, chicken broth with tiny star-shaped pasta, simmered for hours with fresh mint from a pot she asked for. Every day she sang the old lullabies her grandmother had taught her, the same songs Elena had once known. These were melodies passed down through generations of women who had only their love to give. And Lily started coming back to them. The first day, she ate half a bowl. Her eyes followed Aurora around the room. By day 3, a hint of pink returned to her pale cheeks. On day 5, she spoke a full sentence. "Aurora, tell me a story." So Aurora told her about 2 little girls from the west side who used to catch fireflies in jars and dream about faraway castles. She never had to mention the other girl's name. Franco saw everything. He sat in his study, where security monitors showed every room in the mansion, but his gaze was locked on the camera in Lily's room. He watched Aurora build pillow forts with his daughter on the floor. He watched Lily laugh. The sound was tiny through the speakers, but it was unmistakable. He thought that sound had died with Elena. Franco desperately wanted to join them, to walk through that door and kneel beside his daughter, to be part of the magic Aurora was creating. But his feet felt like lead. Something held him back. Maybe pride, or fear. Or maybe it was an emotion he refused to admit. Jealousy. He was jealous of a cleaning woman who had reached his daughter when all his money and power could not. That night, Franco stood outside Lily's room, just as he had done so many times. But this time he heard singing instead of beeping machines. Aurora's soft, warm voice was wrapping around an old lullaby. Lily was already asleep, her breathing steady under the song. For just a moment, Franco let himself lean against the door and listen. Then he heard footsteps. Vincent appeared, his expression serious. "Boss, you have a guest. Margaret Whitmore is in the main hall." Franco's face hardened. Margaret, Elena's mother, had never approved of her daughter's humble background. She had spent years trying to erase every sign of where Elena came from. She never showed up without a motive, and her motives were always selfish. Margaret Whitmore strode into the Castellano mansion like she owned it. At 62 years old, she was perfectly preserved, with platinum blonde hair in a sharp bob and a Chanel suit that cost a fortune. South Sea pearls hung around her neck like a weapon. Her heels clicked on the marble floor with cold precision, each step a declaration of her status. "Your security has gotten ridiculous," she announced before Franco could say a word. "I was forced to wait at the gate for 7 minutes. 7 minutes, Franco. And nobody told me that my own granddaughter was well enough for visitors." Franco's jaw clenched. "I didn't know you were coming, Margaret." A grandmother should not need an appointment to see her own grandchild. Her eyes scanned the foyer, judging every detail. "I heard Lily was doing better. I want to see her immediately." Franco wanted to say no. He knew this visit meant trouble. But Margaret was Elena's mother, and as Lily's grandmother, she had rights. "Follow me," he said coldly. They climbed the grand staircase without a word, Margaret's expensive perfume leaving a trail behind her. Franco led her down the east wing to the room that had felt like a tomb just days before. He pushed open the door. The sight inside made Margaret stop dead. Aurora was sitting on the rug, her hair messy and her uniform stained with paint. She had her hands up like monster claws, making a funny, ferocious face at Aurora made a silly face, growling like a friendly monster, and little Lily giggled. Her laugh echoed in the room like tiny, perfect bells, the sound of a child who did not know sorrow. She held a toy rabbit tightly in one hand and reached for Aurora with the other, wanting more of the game. "The monster is coming to get you," Aurora whispered loudly, crawling across the floor. Lily squealed with happiness and fell back on a soft pile of pillows, but Margaret's expression was twisted with disgust. not with happiness or relief. "What is going on here?" Her voice sliced through the joyful moment. "Why is a servant putting her hands on my granddaughter?" The room fell completely silent. Aurora quickly stood up, trying to smooth her simple uniform while looking at the floor. "Ma'am, I was not speaking to you," Margaret said without even looking at her. "Franco, I want an explanation right now." Lily was no longer laughing. She stared at her grandmother with big, confused eyes. She slowly moved until she was hiding behind Aurora's legs, her little fingers grabbing the maid's dress. She did not go to her grandmother. She hid from her. Margaret noticed, and the rejection felt like a slap on her perfectly made-up face. Her lips tightened into a thin, angry line. "Franco, come to my study this instant." She spun around and stormed out of the room, leaving a cold feeling behind her. Inside the study, the door was shut and the air was heavy. Margaret began her attack. "You hired a girl from the streets to look after my granddaughter? A child with Whitmore blood? Do you have any idea who she is? Did you check her background? Did you verify anything about her?" Franco just stood near the window, looking at the gray Chicago skyline. He did not say a word. The truth was, he had not checked anything. He had not asked any questions. He had just seen his daughter finally eating after 23 long days, and he made a choice from his heart, not from his head. Margaret's eyes grew narrow. "I see. In that case, let me do the investigating for you." The next morning, Franco called Vincent to his study because Margaret insisted. The room with its dark wood walls felt unusually small, filled with tension. Margaret sat in a big leather chair like a queen waiting for a report, tapping her polished fingernails on the armrest. Franco stood with his back to them, facing the window, watching the sky over Lake Michigan turn dark. Vincent walked in holding a plain folder. "Do you have the report?" Margaret demanded before Franco could say anything. Vincent looked at Franco, who gave a small nod. He then opened the file. Aurora Hayes, 28 years old. She was born and raised on the west side of Chicago. He turned a page. Her father died from a heart attack when she was 5. He worked too hard at the meatpacking factory. Her mother got married again 2 years later to a man named Dale Simmons. This man had a police record for public drunkenness, domestic abuse, and small thefts. A satisfied smirk appeared on Margaret's face. "Go on." "Her mother passed away from cancer when Aurora was 16. They had no money for her medical care." Vincent paused, and his voice became a little softer. "The girl ran away from her stepfather that year. She was homeless for a time. She took any job she could, working as a waitress, a cleaner, or in factories, or in—" Franco did not move from the window, but his shoulders became stiff. "She got married at 24. Her husband was Derek Cole. He was a gambler who owed money to loan sharks on the South Side. He accumulated a debt of $50,000, and then he vanished, leaving her to deal with it." Margaret leaned in, her eyes gleaming. "So she is in debt to dangerous people. How interesting." Vincent's jaw was tense. "There is more. 6 months ago, the loan sharks located her. They hurt her very badly. She was 5 months pregnant at the time. She lost the baby." A heavy silence filled the room. For a moment, even Margaret was speechless. Vincent shut the folder. "Right now, she is the only person taking care of her 82-year-old grandmother, Martha Hayes, who has advanced Alzheimer's disease. The cost of her grandmother's medicine uses almost all of Aurora's money. She is late on her rent, her bills, and everything else." Margaret was the first to speak again, her voice full of poison. "You see, Franco? Debt, criminals, a woman who has nothing to lose. What do you think she truly wants from our family, from our wealth?" Franco finally turned around. His face showed no emotion, like a mask made of stone. But you could see a storm brewing in his eyes. He thought of another woman from the West Side, a waitress he had met long ago. She wore old dresses and dreamed of a better life. She was a woman Margaret had hated the moment Elena brought her home. That woman was his wife, the great love of his life, and the mother of his child. "Does she have a criminal record?" Franco asked in a low voice. Vincent shook his head. Her record is clean. She does not even have a parking ticket. She is just. He stopped, looking for the right way to say it. She is just someone who has had a lot of terrible luck. Franco moved to his desk and sat down with a heavy sigh. He placed his hands together under his chin and looked at a picture of Elena that sat on his desk. Aurora stays, he said finally. That is my final decision. Margaret stood up, her face red with anger. You will be sorry about this, Franco. I am telling you now. She marched to the door and pulled it open with unnecessary force. Down the hall, Aurora was holding Lily's hand, leading her to the garden. The little girl was talking happily, pointing at something outside the window. Margaret stopped and stared at them. The poor girl and the Whitmore air, looking as close as a mother and daughter. A cold, cruel smile slowly formed on her face. A wicked idea was already taking shape in her mind. The 3 days that Margaret was at the house were 3 days of pure misery for Aurora. It started with little acts of meanness. Margaret wrinkled her nose when Aurora served Lily a bowl of soup. What is that awful smell? It smells like a poor person's house. Can you not make something that does not remind one of a homeless shelter? Aurora did not say a word. She just carried the bowl to the kitchen and returned with another one that was exactly the same. During dinner, Margaret made Aurora stand behind her chair like an old-fashioned servant. She had her refill her water, get new napkins, and listen to her constant complaints. The older woman never said Aurora's name. She would just call her that woman or the help, or give a rude wave of her hand full of rings. Aurora tolerated everything because of Lily, but the thing that made Margaret the most furious was something she could not change. Lily would not go anywhere without Aurora. If Margaret tried to hold the child, Lily would pull away. If Margaret offered expensive gifts or promised to take her shopping, Lily would just shake her head and move closer to Aurora. When Margaret wanted to read her a bedtime story, Lily would ask for Aurora to do it instead. Each rejection felt like fire in Margaret's heart. On the third day, she put her plan into action. You, Margaret called to Aurora from the living room. Come and help me. The little lock on my necklace is jammed. Aurora walked toward her carefully. The pearl necklace from the South Sea looked radiant on Margaret's neck. It was a string of shining pearls that was worth more money than Aurora could earn in 10 lifetimes. Turn your back to me, Aurora said gently. I will see if I can open it. Her fingers worked on the tiny lock. In a few seconds it came undone. There, it is open. Margaret took off the necklace and looked at it for a second. Good, you can leave now. Aurora went back to Lily, who was busy drawing at a little table near the window. She did not think about the necklace again. 15 minutes later, a loud scream broke the quiet. My necklace! Margaret's voice shot through the house like an alarm. The household staff came running from all over. Franco came out of his study with a worried look on his face. It is missing, Margaret yelled. She was standing in the middle of the large entryway with her hand on her neck. My South Sea pearl necklace. It is worth $200,000. Somebody has stolen it. Her eyes scanned all the staff members, and then they locked onto Aurora. She was the last person who touched me. Search her. Aurora felt her blood run cold. I did not. Search her right now. Mrs. Crawford, the head of staff, came forward with a serious look. Miss Hayes, would you please show us what is in your pockets? Aurora's hands were shaking as she put them into her apron pocket. It was the same apron she had worn all day. The pocket only had a handkerchief and a ribbon for Lily's hair. But then her fingers felt something cold and smooth. She pulled her hand out. The string of South Sea pearls fell from her pocket. They shimmered in the light, so beautiful and so incriminating. Mrs. Crawford let out a gasp. Margaret's face was a mask of victory. You see, a thief. I knew it the moment I laid eyes on her. Aurora just stared at the necklace in her hand. She did not take it. She had not even held it after she took it off Margaret's neck. But it did not matter now. She looked up at Franco. She looked for the man who had cried in the kitchen. The man who had given her his trust with his own daughter. Their eyes met. His were cold and hard, like steel. The warmth was gone. Franco started walking toward Aurora. Each step on the marble floor sounded like a hammer banging nails into a coffin. His eyes moved from the pearls that were hanging from her trembling hand to her pale, pleading face. Then she looked at Margaret, who was dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, putting on a show of grief. A war was raging in Franco's head. All the evidence pointed to her guilt. The necklace was in her pocket. She had debts. She had a motive. The file Vincent gave him showed a desperate woman who would do anything to stay afloat. But a quieter voice whispered to him, a voice that remembered Aurora singing those lullabies that smelled of mint and brought his daughter back to life. Margaret's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. "Call the police, Franco. This woman is a thief. She belongs in a prison cell for this." Franco's jaw was tight. He imagined the headlines, his family names smeared across the news. His rivals would love the scandal. "No police," he said, his voice empty. "I will not have reporters all over my home." He turned to Aurora. Their eyes met. His were cold and closed off. Hers were filled with a desperate hope. "You have 5 minutes to get out of this house." The words felt like stones shattering glass. "Sir, please," Aurora begged, stepping forward as her voice cracked. "I did not take it. I swear on my life, I would never." "I trusted you," Franco's voice sliced through her pleas. "I gave you my daughter, and this is how you repay me." "I didn't. 5 minutes. Starting now." Aurora stood there, paralyzed, the pearl necklace still in her hand. Mrs. Crawford stepped in and took the pearls from her, holding them as if they were sacred objects that had been tainted. Slowly, Aurora untied her apron. She folded it perfectly, one last act of dignity before her world fell apart, and placed it on the table. She turned and walked toward the front door. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the mansion. "Aurora, no!" Lily stood at the top of the grand staircase, barefoot, her face streaked with tears. She must have heard everything through the house's old ventilation system. The little girl raced down the stairs, almost falling, her small legs moving as fast as they could. She threw herself at Aurora, wrapping her arms around her legs with all her might. "Don't go, Mommy. Please don't go." Aurora stopped breathing. "Mommy." The word just hung there in the still air, like a combination of a prayer and a curse. Franco just looked at his daughter. His daughter, who had not called anyone Mommy since Elena passed away, was now holding on to the cleaning lady as if she were a lifeline. His heart broke into a million pieces on the marble floor. Margaret saw her chance. "Do you see?" Her voice was pure poison. "She has manipulated the child, taking advantage of a grieving 4-year-old for her own benefit. This woman is a danger, Franco." Franco looked at Lily's tear-streaked face, at Aurora's shaking hands, and at Margaret's smile of victory, which she tried to hide behind fake worry. The pressure was overwhelming. Doubt clouded his judgment. Fear choked him. He did what any trapped animal would do. He lashed out. "Get out!" The shout ripped from his throat. "Get out of my house this instant!" Aurora flinched as if she had been hit. Gently, she loosened Lily's fingers from her legs. The little girl screamed, reaching for her, but another maid quickly came and picked Lily up, carrying her away as she struggled. Aurora walked to the front door and opened it. Outside, a storm was raging. Rain came down in sheets, and thunder echoed across Lake Michigan like the sound of war drums. She took a step outside. The large oak door slammed shut behind her, cutting off Lily's cries and trapping Aurora out in the storm. She had no umbrella, no cash, and no place to live. She just walked into the darkness. The rain soaked her thin uniform. She had nowhere to go, and nothing more to lose. The Castellano mansion began to fall apart just 3 hours after Aurora disappeared into the storm. It started with a fever. Lily's temperature shot up to 104 degrees within an hour of the door shutting. The medical staff that Franco had sent away came rushing back after getting frantic calls. They found the little girl shaking uncontrollably in her bed, her body trembling in a way no medicine could stop. And then she stopped moving altogether. Dr. Webb was there all night, his old hands checking her vitals, changing intravenous lines, and giving her drugs that had no effect. The monitors kept beeping their constant warnings. The nurses whispered to each other in the corners, their looks full of unspoken fear. By midnight, Lily was unconscious. Her breathing was weak and difficult, and her skin was a pale grayish color. Franco sat by her bed, holding her small, limp hand between both of his. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold on. The powerful mafia boss was now just an empty husk, watching his daughter fade away all over again. "I just do not get it, doctor," Franco confessed, his voice heavy with weariness and doubt. She had been getting better, stronger. But after that woman was forced out, just hours later, he could not finish the thought. It was like her little body just surrendered. The doctor had no answers for him. Lily's dry lips parted, shaping words he could not make out. Franco bent down, putting his ear right next to her mouth. "Aurora, Aurora, Mommy." Her fevered mind repeated the names in a desperate, broken loop. Even unconscious, even at death's door, his daughter cried out for the woman he had cast out. In the corner, Margaret stood with her arms folded, her face a mask of grandmotherly worry. But through his haze of sorrow, Franco saw it. Her eyes did not match the act. Behind the show of concern, he saw a spark of something sharp, cold, and pleased. Victory. The thought hit Franco like a blow to the gut. Why was Margaret not devastated? Her own granddaughter was on the brink. Her last link to her deceased daughter was slipping away. But under that carefully crafted performance, Margaret Whitmore had the look of a winner. Franco let go of Lily's hand and rose to his feet. Every joint protested, his body suddenly burdened by all 37 of his years. "Boss," Vincent said, emerging from the dim light. "Where are you headed?" Franco gave no reply. He walked from Lily's room, moving past the staff, the machines, and the painted faces of his forefathers who built an empire on violence and intimidation. He found himself in the East Wing, heading for a door untouched since his wife's burial. Elena's study. He had sealed it shut the day after her funeral, discarding the key. Inside, time had stopped. Her books, her pictures, her private world. Franco paused at the door, his hand hesitating over the knob. His fingers shook. Opening it meant confronting everything he had avoided. The pain, the blame, and the facts about the woman he had sent out into the night. He hoped that some part of Elena remained, something that held the answers he needed. His hand tightened on the handle, and the door creaked open. It was as if Elena Castellano's spirit rushed out to meet him. Her scent was still in the air, a faint, ghost-like trace of gardenias and vanilla. It once meant comfort and love. Now, it was the smell of pure loss. Franco entered the study as if it were a sacred crypt. Everything was just as she had left it. Books sat on the shelves in their perfect order. Her paintbrushes were in a clay pot on the desk, their tips hard with old paint. Photos in silver frames captured moments of joy. There was Elena with a brand new Lily, Elena at their wedding, Elena smiling brightly under a summer sky. He traced his fingers along the books, disturbing a thick layer of settled dust. He was not sure what he hoped to find. He just needed a sign, anything from Elena to show him the way. His fingers brushed against a small wooden box hidden behind some poetry books. He slid it out and placed it on the desk. The old hinges groaned when he opened it. A bundle of letters tied with a worn ribbon was inside. Franco's heart skipped a beat. He carefully untied the ribbon, laying the letters out. Most were to Elena from friends and relatives, but a single envelope stood out. It was a letter from Elena that was never mailed. The address was to an Aurora Hayes in Southside Chicago. A chill went down Franco's spine. His hands shook as he opened the letter. Elena's familiar script filled the page, and it felt like she was in the room with him. My dearest cousin, Aurora, I know things are terrible for you right now. I wish I could do something more. But Franco, he just does not get it. He believes every problem can be fixed with money. He does not see that some hurts can only be healed by love, not by a check. I have been making Grandma's chicken soup for Lily. You remember it, right? With the little star pasta and fresh mint, cooked for hours. Lily is completely hooked on it. It's the one thing she will eat when she is not feeling well. Nothing else even comes close. Aurora, if I am ever not here, you have to find Lily. You are the only one. I trust to love her like I do. The only one who gets our family, what is really important. Franco's heart is good. It is just hidden under a lot. You will find it one day, I know it. I love you, Kus. Always, Elena. The letter fell from his grasp, drifting to the ground. Aurora was family. She was Elena's own cousin. She was the person Elena had put all her faith in, and he had sent her away. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The soup, the familiar songs, the immediate bond Lily had with her. It all made sense. They had the same blood, the same past, the same grandmother who showed them how to cook. He had not just hired some random woman. Destiny had brought his wife's last wish right to him, and he had dismissed it. A guttural sound escaped his lips. Vincent! The door flew open, and his top man stood there, his expression shocked. Franco was already moving, covering the room's length in seconds. Find her. Find Aurora. Right now. He then charged through the main doors of the house and out into the storm. The storm was furious. Rain hit his face like icy shards. The sky split with thunder that seemed to shake the very earth. He did not grab a coat. He did not pause for a second. Vincent ran to catch up, yelling above the wind's roar, "Boss, let me get the car! It is too dangerous to go by yourself!" Franco paid him no mind. He sprinted for the garage, his expensive shoes sliding on the drenched gravel, his $1,000 suit instantly ruined. He had his phone to his ear before he even got to the vehicle. "Mrs. Crawford, I need the employee file for Aurora Hayes. Give me her address now." He got the information, committed it to memory, and ended the call. Vincent reached him just as Franco jumped behind the wheel of a black SUV and started the engine. His man barely got the passenger door closed before Franco slammed on the gas, tearing down the long driveway. They raced into the storm with a desperate fury. The wipers could not keep up with the sheets of rain. Flashes of lightning lit up the deserted roads. Franco's grip on the wheel was iron tight, his knuckles pale as he forced the big vehicle through deep water at intersections. Any normal person would have stopped. As they reached Southside, the scenery changed drastically. Fancy northern brownstones were replaced by decaying apartment buildings. Some streetlights barely worked, while others were completely out. Potholes were the size of small craters. Suddenly, the street itself was gone, replaced by a deep, impassable current of muddy water. Franco hit the brakes hard. "We need to find another way," Vincent started to say. But Franco was already out and moving. He waded into the flood without a moment's thought, the knee-high sludge trying to pull off his Italian shoes. The rain matted his hair to his head, while mud ruined his suit. He did not notice. He pushed through the flooded streets, banging on doors and yelling at the shocked people who looked out. "Aurora Hayes! Have you seen Aurora Hayes? Which house is hers?" He got nothing but confused looks, doors shut in his face and wary glares. At last, an old woman in a worn shawl opened her door just a crack. "You mean the girl whose grandmother is sick?" She looked Franco over, from his wrecked designer clothes to the frantic look etched on his features. "She was evicted last week. Her landlord just tossed her out. Someone mentioned she might be at the old abandoned church down the block." Franco ran. The church was a looming Gothic ruin at the end of a dead-end street, its windows boarded up and its roof collapsed. A crooked door hung from rusted hinges. Franco shoved his way inside. The blackness was absolute. Rain pounded on what was left of the ceiling, leaking in from 100 different places. Broken pews were scattered around like fallen soldiers. And there, in a corner, huddled by the altar, was Aurora. She was soaked through and shaking hard, her thin uniform giving no warmth at all. She clutched a worn photograph to her chest, using her body to shield it from the rain. It showed two small girls smiling in the sun. Franco crossed the ruined space and knelt before her. Muddy water soaked his pants, but he did not feel it. Aurora. Her name cracked in his throat. I know. I found the letter from Elena. I know who you really are. Aurora slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were red and swollen, completely empty of anything but exhaustion and pain. What do you know? Her voice was a raw scratch. That I am a thief? Or that I am the poor cousin Elena kept secret because she knew you would look down on me, just like you did that first day? Franco bowed his head. I know I do not deserve forgiveness, he whispered. But Lily is dying. She is asking for you. Please, his voice broke. Please come home. She needs you. Aurora stared at the man on his knees before her, the crime boss of South Chicago, humbled in the mud of her old neighborhood. Rain mixed with the tears on his face, making them one and the same. She was quiet for a long time. In her head, she heard Elena's voice from years ago. Franco has a kind heart. It is just buried very deep. She thought of Lily, of her small hand reaching out, of her chapped lips trying to form the word mommy. Aurora closed her eyes. I am not coming back for you, she finally said. Her voice was steady, even as the cold seeped into her bones. I am coming back for Lily, because of the promise I made to Elena. Franco nodded, his head still down. I understand. He stood and offered his hand to help her. After a brief pause, Aurora took it. They drove in silence back through the storm. The rain started to let up as they entered the wealthy northern part of the city, as if the weather itself knew about the invisible lines of class. The mansion's lights were blazing in the pre-dawn dark when they arrived. It was 4 in the morning. Aurora did not even wait for the car to come to a complete stop. She threw the door open and ran inside, past shocked servants, up the main staircase, and down the east hall toward Lily's room. The child was lying motionless in her bed, surrounded by beeping monitors and worried nurses. Her skin was as pale as a ghost. Her breathing was shallow and uneven. Aurora was across the room in 3 quick steps. She climbed onto the bed, pulled Lily's small body into her arms, held her close, and began to sing. The old lullaby came from her lips. It was the same one her grandmother taught her and Elena decades before. The song that smelled of chicken soup and star-shaped pasta, of a love that cost nothing and meant everything. Lily stirred, her eyelids fluttered, her small fingers twitched, then wrapped tightly around Aurora's arm. Aurora. The whisper was barely a sound. You came back. Aurora pressed a kiss to Lily's forehead, tears now flowing freely down her own face. I will never leave you again, baby. Never. Franco stood in the doorway and watched the two of them on the bed, his daughter and her cousin. This was the family Elena had tried to give him, the family he had been too blind to see. Morning arrived, gray and still. Franco had Margaret come to the study. She walked in with her usual arrogant air, expecting to be praised. Instead, Elena's letter was waiting on the desk. All the color left her face as she read it. Get out of my house, Franco said. There was no anger in his voice, only a cold, final tone. Never come back. Margaret opened her mouth to argue, but Vincent appeared at her side, his hand firm on her arm. This way, Mrs. Whitmore. She was walked to her car without any ceremony. The gate slammed shut behind her with a loud clang. Inside the mansion, a quiet settled in. But for the first time in 23 days, it was not a silence of sadness. It was the silence of peace. 6 months later, spring had returned to Chicago. Tulips were blooming in the Castellano Gardens, a burst of red, yellow, and purple where only grayness had been. The mansion no longer felt like a tomb. Sunlight streamed in through open curtains. Fresh flowers were in every room. And most importantly, laughter echoed in halls that had only known sorrow. Lily ran across the green lawn, her cheeks flushed with happiness, her dark hair flying behind her like a banner for her new life. She chased a butterfly, and her giggles floated on the spring air like music. Inside the kitchen, Aurora stood stirring a familiar pot at the stove. She was no longer wearing the navy blue maid uniform. A simple floral dress now hung on her frame, and her hair was loose on her shoulders. The yellow rubber gloves were gone for good. She hummed the old lullaby as she cooked, adding pasta stars to the bubbling soup. Footsteps came up from behind, and strong arms wrapped around her waist. Franco rested his chin on her shoulder, breathing in the scent of mint and chicken that smelled like home. "What is special about the soup today?" he whispered in her ear. Aurora smiled, a small secret playing on her lips. "There is a special star in there for a new member of the family." Franco's world stopped. Aurora faced him, guiding his hand to her stomach, where a gentle curve was just beginning to show. "Lily is going to have a baby brother or sister." Franco, the powerful mob boss who never blinked when giving a dark order, felt tears stream down his face. These were not tears of sorrow or anger. They were tears of pure, overwhelming joy. Before a word could escape his lips, the kitchen door flew open. "Daddy, Aurora, you have to see what I found." Lily rushed in, her hands cupped around a tiny treasure. She opened her hands to show them a gorgeous butterfly with orange and black wings. "It landed on my finger, like it was magic." Franco scooped his daughter into one arm, wrapping the other around Aurora. The three of them stood there in the sunlit kitchen, a complete family. A family built not just on blood, but on love, survival, and second chances. On a nearby counter, a silver photo frame seemed to watch over them. Elena's smile shone from the picture, her eyes warm, her look so peaceful, as if this was her plan all along, as if she had made sure of it from the very start. This story shows us that real love cannot be purchased with money or influence. The most costly doctors and famous chefs were unable to save Lily, but a simple bowl of soup made with love brought her back from the edge. It proves that the most incredible miracles can come from very ordinary places. Family is not always about blood relatives. Aurora and Lily had a connection that went far deeper than genetics. Theirs was a bond of kindness, sacrifice, and the bravery to love even when it's scary. And it teaches us that it is never too late for a second chance. Franco had locked his heart away under layers of pride and pain. But when he finally got on his knees and begged for forgiveness, he learned that you can always change for the better. If this story resonated with you, please press the like button and subscribe to our channel so you can see every new video we post. Share this story with a person who needs to see it today. We are curious to know what special meal from your mother or grandmother always heals your spirit. For the Castellano family, it was chicken soup with star-shaped noodles. What is it for you? Please drop a comment below and tell us your story. We read each and every message, and your own experiences give us the inspiration to make videos that connect every one of us. Thank you for spending your time with us. We hope you have good health, joy, and calm in your life. May you always be able to find your own star, even when the night is at its darkest. Farewell for now, and we will catch you in the next video. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.